Hello, my squiggly candles. My name is Mina and welcome back. I hope you had a lovely New Year's Eve and New Year's. I celebrated New Year's Eve for like the first time since 2019. So I feel good. I feel rejuvenated. I'm really excited for this upcoming year. I'm working on a new project, which I can't wait to show you when it's done. But yeah, just very exciting things going on. I am actually in my new space now. I'm debating what to put here. I feel like it needs like an artwork. I was thinking of putting a curtain or something. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know. But this white space is dying to be filled. So let's just jump right into it. Today, we're going to be talking about modernism in interior design and a little bit on architecture and why people are redoing their homes to look grayish, which is the portmanteau for gray and beige. I was inspired to do this video because I came across this TikTok that was then reposted onto Twitter, and there were a lot of mixed opinions going about it, mostly negative.
I'm sorry, this has to be addressed. How did this become this, become this, become this?
This is not the first home renovation video I've seen where someone has deliberately removed all the old history of a building and turned it into this like Alcatraz chic style. On the higher end of this interior aesthetic is Kim Kardashian's infamous house that is very beige and cream. She and Kanye West have kind of lived this way for a while, but post-divorce, she did another in-house interview with Vogue, which reignited criticism towards her interior tastes. In the video, she features a few rooms in her 15,000 square foot gigantic mansion, the kitchen, the sitting room, which are both incredibly minimal and monochromatic with literally no personal items anywhere, minus the select few that she talks about in the video, and then her basketball court and 3 of her cars, which also purposely match her house. About her house, she tells Vogue,
I want it to be just really quiet and I want everything to feel calming. It's like each kid can have their full style and taste in their bedroom and have so much fun, but in the main house, I really like the calmness.
So in terms of the negative viewpoints, people said that it looked soulless, it looked cold, unwelcoming, like a prison or a psych ward. But there were also a lot of commenters saying that it was a sophisticated house. It was elegant and classic and clean. Personally, I lean more towards maximalism than minimalism. So I don't love clutter, but I prefer a house that looks lived in, that has interesting objects around it, and that has color. My impression of Kim's house is that it looks a bit like a museum. I think it's very clean. There's no doubt that it's incredibly elegant and that it costs like probably a shit ton of money to redo it and transform it into what it is today. But I personally know myself, and I know that I would be very depressed if I was like cooped up there during the pandemic or something. Like I would just not want to spend that much time at home. I also have black cats, so I just know that the cream color scheme would not work for me. There would be black hair everywhere. Very unchic. Regardless, it clearly works for some people, so I want to dive into that. But first, I need to take a break. For the past week, my favorite way to spend a quick downtime during the workday has been to play Two Dots, which is a puzzle game that's free to download on iOS and Android. They also are a sponsor for today's video. Two Dots is pretty popular. They have over 115 million downloads globally, and you can definitely tell why. I really like the game's minimalistic design, the relaxing music, and the fact that you can play at your own pace without worrying about a clock. It's just a very simple design without all the unnecessary clutter that you usually get from a free app. They also have other games within the game, for example, weekly events like the scavenger hunt, where you have to find the items on a map, kind of like Where's Waldo. This is my favorite side game. But they also have a game called Treasure Hunt, where you need to complete 7 special levels to unlock unique rewards. Download Two Dots using the link in my description so you can play today. Thank you, Two Dots. It's no surprise that in our Western society, a lot of people consider neutrals to be very classy and elegant and timeless. Not just for interior design, but also for clothing, for product design, literally anything. There's something about beige, white, gray, and black that has Western society in its like chokehold. So why is that? I trace it back to ancient Greece. Well, not really. I trace it back to excavations of ancient Greek statues. If you go to any art museum that has a Greco-Roman statue exhibit, you'll notice that these figures are beautifully crafted, made of marble, and super, super, super pale. These are always like my favorite exhibits of any museum because I'm a basic bitch, and I just think of that one scene in Pride and Prejudice when Keira Knightley is wandering around the statues and looking at all the beautiful busts, and I envision myself as that. But the problem with these exhibits is that it leads to this misconception that Greek statues were just like these white marble statues when really, in reality, they were polychromatic, which means they were originally all elaborately painted. And the reason they're not anymore is because over time, the paint has worn off. The New Yorker published a piece a few years ago called The Myth of Whiteness in Classical Sculpture. And in it, they talked to Mark Abbé, who is a professor of ancient art at the University of Georgia. In 2000, Abbé was a graduate student at New York University's Institute of Fine Arts and was working at an archaeological dig in the ancient Greek city of Aphrodisias, which is in present-day Turkey. A little bit of info about Aphrodisias. It was a metropolis of art until about the 7th century CE when an earthquake destroyed the place. But in 1961, archaeologists began excavating the city. When Abbé was there, he noticed there were some traces of colors in the excavated relics. There was some red pigment in the lips, black pigment in the hair. Archaeologists and museum curators have always found traces of color in these statues, but for centuries, they were scrubbing them away before presenting these statues to the public. This was a practice since the Renaissance era when these statues were first getting their mainstream revival. So, why did they scrub-a-dub-dub? Oftentimes, art restorers and dealers vigorously scrub these objects to enhance their marmoreal gleam and their collectability. But also for a while, scholars wanted to believe something that fit in line with their own political ideologies. For example, in the 18th century, German scholar Johann Winckelmann contended that the whiter the body is, the more beautiful it is, and that color contributes to beauty, but it is not beauty. When the ancient Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were first excavated in the mid-18th century, Winckelmann did notice traces of color in these statues, but he first claimed that a statue of Artemis with red hair, red sandals, and a red quiver strap must have not been Greek, but Etruscan, and at the time, Etruscans were considered a less sophisticated earlier civilization. Historian Nell Irvin Painter writes in her book, The History of White People, that Winckelmann was a Eurocentrist who depreciated people of other nationalities like the Chinese or the Kalmyk. She writes, color in sculpture came to mean barbarism, for they assumed that the lofty ancient Greeks were too sophisticated to color their art. Late 18th century writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe similarly declared that savage nations, uneducated people, and children have a great predilection for vivid colors. He also noted that people of refinement avoid vivid colors in their dress and the objects that are about them. During the 20th century, we also saw the birth of the modernist movement, which also championed the abstraction of white forms. Pioneer of modern architecture, Le Corbusier even wrote in an essay in 1920 titled Purism, "Let us leave to the clothes dyers the sensory jubilation of the paint tube." On the fascist fronts of Italy and Germany, nationalist artists were creating these white marble statues that represented what they determined as the idealized body. In the 1930s, ancient Greek ideals were like fusing together with the Aryan myth, and fascists were even claiming that ancient Greeks were Nordic people. At the 1937 opening of the House of German Art in Munich, there was a parade that featured ancient Germans who were just dressed as ancient Greeks. In Italy, Mussolini was also very involved in creating architectural structures that were reminiscent of ancient Rome, so as to signal the genius of the Roman Empire and build nationalistic fervor for modern-day Italy. And even today, fascists continue to co-opt Greco-Roman sculptures to further their own political agendas. For example, white nationalist group Identity Europa started putting up posters on college campuses that presented classical white marble statues as emblems of white nationalism. Xenophobic writer Gregory Hood also argued that bringing back classical architectural style for federal buildings would be one small step towards reuniting white Americans with our civilizational tradition. He further said that other forms of architecture reinforce an idea of a racial deracination and alienate white people from their past in order to make them feel helpless, rootless, and weak.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I'm getting a little off topic here, but what I'm trying to say is that the whitewashing of Greek and Roman statues has led to untrue beliefs of what Greek and Roman society actually was at the time. The reality is that the Roman Empire was very diverse. Ancient sources note that there was a variety of skin tones, and if we look at excavated art that hasn't been whitewashed, then we can see how artists also try to translate that skin tone across their work. For example, when looking at the Fayum portraits, which were near life-size portraits that were painted on funerary objects, these portraits portray a range of skin tones from olive green to deep brown. So, in the 1990s, Vinzenz Brinkmann and Ulrich Koch Brinkmann began recreating Greek and Roman sculptures in plaster, painting them with an approximation of their original colors. The resulting work is a series of sculptures called Gods in Color, which officially launched in 2003 and has been shown all over the world. Throughout the exhibition, the color replicas are juxtaposed with white plaster casts of marble pieces, fakes that look like what we think of as the real thing. So I live in New York City and I've gone to the Met a couple times, and in the Met, they actually have a couple of these reproduction statues. And let me tell you, my first impression seeing them was that they looked really gaudy and just very weird because my brain is so used to seeing white marble. So seeing this was just like very off-putting. I also think that the opacity of the paint that they use kind of like lend itself to look cheaper, because when we think of something that's very opaque and flat, we think of like plastic and cheap materials. Abe also agrees with me, or maybe I should say I agree with Abe, but when asked for his opinion on the exhibit, he said that the hues are too flat and opaque, and the plaster, which most of the replicas are made from, absorb paint in a way that marble does not. So I also think it's really important to recognize that these reconstructions are not exact replica. They're estimations, because we'll never really know for sure what something would have looked like exactly. But speaking of color, last year, the Science Museum Group Collection published a newsletter that got a lot of traction. In it, they examined over 7,000 household objects in their museum and created a graph that shows how the color of objects have changed over time. As you can see, according to their data, there's been a rise in gray over time and a decline in brown and yellow. Part of the reason why objects are grayer is because of the change in materials used. If we look at this telegraph from 1844 versus the iPhone 3G mobile phone, which came out in like 2008, the colors from the telegraph are a result of using mahogany wood. The telegraph's rounded pillars also reflect light and create shadows, and its age lends to color variation. But even with the change in materials, in the mid-century, object colors were way more saturated, and in terms of phones, there was a broader range of colors up until the 1980s. The graying began in the late 1980s with the introduction of the brick phone. As for interiors, we've had colorful interior options for a long time now. Thomas Jefferson famously painted the dining room of his Monticello estate chrome yellow. But with that said, most color organizations for paints didn't exist until the 1960s. In the 1950s and 60s, the universal tinting colors for house paints consisted of oil-based earth pigments, or clays, so ochres, siennas, and umbers made from iron oxide. Paints of this era were luminous and slightly transparent. But unfortunately, these paints also contained high levels of VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, which were later deemed to be pollutants and cancer-causing. In 2011, the first waterborne oil finish enamel was introduced as a viable alternative to these oil-based enamels, and environmentally, they were a much safer option. The only issue was like an aesthetic issue in the sense that these paints looked duller, looked flatter, and more opaque. So as you can imagine, beige and gray paints of today are even more lifeless than they ever were before. So with that said, why do people make this choice to paint with neutrals? Tash Bradley, director of interior design at Lick, a UK-based wallpaper and paint brand, theorizes that the hustle and bustle of pre-pandemic life likely caused the gray on gray trend. She says, you go out and are so overstimulated so that when you come home, you just want to shut the door and have peace and a soft, calm home. Similar to what Kim Kardashian told Vogue. And I think there's a point in saying that a lot of us spend a lot of time online now. And we're so overexposed to color and saturation on screens so that when we inevitably log off and put our phones away, we just don't have the stamina anymore to appreciate colors of the natural environment. This is just my hypothesis. Like, there's no scientific study that I know of that backs that, but it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But does gray really make you feel calm? According to Tash, who also is a trained color psychologist, gray is soulless. It honestly drains you. When I wake up in London and it's gray outside, all I want to do is pull the duvet over my head and go back to sleep. I think regardless of how beige and gray make us feel personally, there is this common consensus around Western society that grays, beiges, neutrals in general are elegant, classy, timeless, as I said before. Part of that goes back to our misconception of ancient Greece and their elegant white marble statues, but also in contemporary society, there are just so many articles that are like how to dress classy, how to dress professionally, how to dress wealthy, and there's always an emphasis on wearing neutrals. This is a major switch from mid-19th century thinking, which is that if you were wearing neutrals, it was because you couldn't afford dyed clothing. But nowadays, neutrals, and beige in particular, represent this idea that you are comfortable in who you are and that you don't need to draw attention to yourself. Also, design and construction are more apparent when you look at a neutral piece. The garment can't hide behind a colorful pattern to distract from its cheap fabric or poor tailoring. There's also a sense of like pureness in neutral tones. Neutral tones act as blank canvases, which is especially profitable if you're trying to sell a house. People who flip houses are not trying to design a house that they personally would want to live in. They're trying to design a house that could entice as many people as possible. It's much easier to look at a blank space and conceptualize how you would decorate it, rather than looking at a space that's colorful and mismatched and has its own personality as a starting point. Most of the interior design that we see today and that we often have grown-ups about stem from the school of modernism. Modernism started roughly at the turn of the 20th century, and its core idea was that the world had to be fundamentally redesigned. Especially after World War I and the Russian Revolution, some philosophers believed that the human condition could be healed by new approaches to art and design. Economic inequality was central to the modernist agenda, and architects devoted a lot of energy into designing affordable housing that met the needs of the interwar period. To do so, modern architects tried to industrialize the building process, experimenting with new construction techniques such as steel, concrete, and glass that could reduce costs and allow for mass production. Modernism placed an emphasis on the technological and the essential in architecture. Because this made housing construction cheaper, it's no surprise that these types of buildings grew in demand. As the editors for M+1 magazine write, if it's cheaper to assemble concrete panels than to hire bricklayers, cityscapes will eventually contain fewer bricks. The unromantic aspect of this agenda is that a lot of these artists and designers started to think of the world as a machine. So a house was a machine to live in, and art was not to adorn life, but organize it. Around the same time, Henry Ford's assembly lines inspired mechanization and high productivity rates. In design, modernism thus centered around sleek, clean lines and prioritized usefulness over embellishment. Fast forward to the 1990s when politicians and real estate developers tried to encourage white people to move back into the cities that they had once fled, a la white flight. By the 2000s, to keep up with these rising populations, infill housing started to crop up. There was a pause in 2008 during the recession, but afterwards, the low interest rates of the time enabled developers to build these cheap, monocultural, ugly buildings all over America today. Part of the monotony is also because developers were trying to circumvent these long community approval processes for new designs, and instead just basically copy and pasted already approved designs. N+1 magazine calls this movement cardboard modernism. Buildings are less ambitious, less humane, and uglier than anyone deserves. They're also really gray. Nowadays, if you live anywhere, but especially if you live in a city like New York, you'll notice all over StreetEasy and Zillow are these extremely soulless and ugly apartment units being listed in gentrifying neighborhoods. For that reason, I'm personally calling this design choice gentrifier core. Amanda Mull wrote about the notable characteristics of these buildings for The Atlantic. These floors, almost always made of what's called luxury vinyl plank flooring in trade terms, or laminate or fake wood in real terms, can vary in shade anywhere from vape cloud to wet gravel. Other elements include a subway tiled backsplash, upper kitchen cabinets replaced with minimalist open shelving, a shower stall covered in tiny multicolored sheets of glass mosaic tile, a barn door gliding along the faux rustic decorative track instead of turning on hinges. Why are these features so ubiquitous in new properties? Much of the 90s and early 2000s home interior centered around all-white appliances, dingy carpets, and warm-toned wood cabinetry. So the easiest way to update a house or apartment, so to speak, is to do the complete reversal of those things, resulting in gray, cool-toned, and geometric interiors. Other markers of 2010's newness accentuate the same baseline minimal traits, from Apple products to mid-century modern IKEA furniture. Millennials, the current apartment renting, house buying market, clearly have aligned themselves with minimalism. Maybe in their plight to be more environmentally cautious, or at least to seem like it, or to appear spiritually superior in a pseudo-Buddhist kind of way, but that's like another topic. But in general, we like to buy a house that's new, because newness implies that things aren't broken. Nothing needs to be fixed. No leaky roofs, no creaky floorboards, all the windows are working. Essentially, it means little to no maintenance, starting costs, and an immediate move in. However, as most renters in urban cities know, just because something looks new does not mean it actually is new or functional for that matter. My boyfriend used to live in this apartment, and when he moved into it, it was marketed as newly renovated. One part of these renovations is that the landlord had painted all the wood floors a gray wall paint. Not even a wood paint, a wall paint. And the reason, so that in the photos, it looked cleaner, I guess, and more light came in because, lighter colors attract more light from the outside. He also did it as a shortcut so that he wouldn't have to pay the exorbitant cost of reflooring the entire place. But in the end, it was just a cosmetic band-aid that made cleaning the floors a truly inconvenient process. As Mole writes, is open shelving really a chic minimalist alternative to bulky upper cabinets? Or is it just much less expensive than replacing the old, outdated uppers that the demo guys ripped out? Tiny mosaic glass tiles look delicate, but they come in sheets that make quick work of a bathroom and can help disguise a multitude of installation sins. Laminate flooring is much cheaper than hardwood and considerably less repairable and adaptable. Unlike real wood, luxury vinyl can't be refinished in another color when trends change. While we can at least admit that Kim Kardashian's grayish home looks modern and elegant, albeit unwelcoming, the poorer man's version, Gentrifier Core, is anything but modern or elegant. It's merely a co-option, just like a nod to the real thing, in the same way that Shein is a nod to Gucci sometimes. Because even though modernism had foundations in fixing social inequality, to have a truly beautiful modern home is a rich person thing. Like, I can't even imagine how many housekeepers Kim Kardashian must employ to make sure there's not one speck of dust on her cream floors. There's another trend in Zillow listings called virtual staging. It's essentially when real estate agents post photos of interiors with furniture that isn't real. Why do they do this? Because it's a common belief that a house that's staged with furniture is more likely to sell than a house that has nothing in it. In ye olden days, homeowners would actually hire people to select the furniture, move the furniture in, out, and around the place, and take well-lit photographs. It's expensive and requires way more people, so virtual staging has become like the cheaper alternative solution. But McMansion Hell, an architecture and urban design commentary blog, explains the result of virtual staging. Virtual staging works well because the softness of overlit white and gray walls enables the fuzzy edges of the renderings to look natural when mixed with an over-stylized reality. If you look at virtual staging in a non-neutral house, it looks immediately plastic and out of place, which is why many realtors opt to either still stage using furniture or leave the place empty. With this understanding, it's clearly more cost efficient to sell a bland neutral space than to sell a house with even a smidge of personality. Will these grayish interiors end, or will we be destined to live in a concrete block for the rest of time? I actually have really positive thoughts about this because interior design, much like fashion, operates in trend cycles. For example, in the 1970s, we saw the birth of postmodernism that championed theatrical and visually stimulating design choices. One of these groups, the Memphis Group, was popular for designing colorful furniture and home objects that are childlike and playful. I also really think it's important to have perspective and realize that a lot of what I'm talking about, these modernist trends, are popular among real estate developers and celebrities. Most normal people still live in houses that are full of knickknacks and history. The reason being is that it's just way more expensive to renovate a house and keep up with interior design trends than it is to, buy a new wardrobe whenever a fashion trend happens. So generally, unless you have a ton of money or if you're buying a house marketed as new, you're likely not going to participate in every single interior design trend that comes and goes. Also, with Gen Z and their penchant for maximalism and cluttercore, the tide is definitely turning. I did a video already talking about Gen Z's maximalism, so I won't go further into that, but also lockdown. During lockdown, so many people took on DIY, painting, home decor. I think a lot of people were just really tired of looking at their gray walls all day. From mid-2020 to mid-2021, Google reported a 250% increase in searches for DIY accent wall ideas, and searches for best interior paint reached an all-time high. Backdrop co-founder Natalie Ebel weighed in. The past year helped us realize the versatility of our spaces. For a lot of people, this was the first time they painted the walls of their homes. And as for most things, the first time is always the biggest hurdle. Now that they realize how attainable and affordable it is to transform a space with just a coat of paint, this increased frequency and creativity will continue and expand. So I think the pendulum is definitely swinging. It'll just be interesting to see how this plays out in the future because Gen Z, as it stands, are still very young. They're definitely not the market that's looking to buy houses. So we're not really seeing this aesthetic change in the way that houses are marketed. But it'll be interesting that once a certain amount of time passes, whether or not developers will try to appeal to this new generation or if they'll just continue doing whatever's cheapest. So this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for tuning in. I would love to hear what your thoughts about this are, and whether you think there will be the end of grayish or if you think the power of grayish will continue. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye! And don't forget to download 2 Dots by clicking the link in my description.